chiamo Henry, membro dell'Istituto Storico Salesiano, anche membro dell'ACSSA India. Sono qua come membro stabile, sono contento di essere con voi. La mia seconda esperienza in questo ambito della ACSSA, ho fatto la prima esperienza prima volta in India, adesso sono qui con voi. Noi adesso viaggeremo in diversi paesi dell'Europa. Prima iniziamo con l'Inghilterra, passiamo a Polonia e poi in Spagna. Don John Dickson, SDB, salesiano, ha conseguito la laurea in storia ed economia presso l'Università di Oxford e in teologia presso l'Università di Durham. La sua tesi di dottorato ha avuto come tema la fondazione e lo sviluppo dei Salesiani in Inghilterra. Ha insegnato in scuole, seminari e università ed è stato per 12 anni cappellano cattolico alla Royal Holloway University in Londra. Attualmente è rettore della comunità di formazione internazionale a Battersea, Londra. I suoi principali interessi di ricerca riguardano la storia della Chiesa e la storia e teologia della vita religiosa. Attualmente questa relazione è stata avviata dal suor Mary Treacy, è buona memoria, però è stato seguito da due altri, padre Dickson e suor Patricia.
A missionary province without a mission, 1920 to 1950. The second major phase of the Salesian sisters' missionary activity arose from their involvement in the Indian mission. The Salesians had begun missionary work in India in Mylapore, but because of endless difficulties with the diocesan clergy were part of the Padroado, under the titular authority of the Archbishop of Lisbon, the so-called Patriarch of the Indies, they decided to move to North Arcot, then part of the Propaganda Vicariate of Madras, under the authority of the Roman Congregation of the Missions, or Propaganda Fide. Through George Tomatis, Monsignor John Allen, the Archbishop of Madras, had already invited the sisters to work in his archdiocese as early as 1917. However, as the sisters were sent to Tanjore, which belonged to the Diocese of Mylapore, for the time being his offer was kept on hold. He renewed his application on July the 30th, 1925, writing directly to Mother Louisa Vaschetti and simultaneously asking Father Tomatis to recommend his case. Dear and Reverend Mother, your sisters are already working here in India in different dioceses, and taking into consideration that the Salesian Fathers are also stationed here in Madras, I now come to you with a humble request. I have here in Madras a school for over 200 Anglo-Indian poor girls, which is staffed by lay teachers. Now I am very anxious that your sisters should take charge of this school. The school is only an elementary one and does not teach but up to the 4th grade, and of course the teaching is conducted in English. The school is recognised and subsidised by the government, and the government grants half their expenses. The other half is met by the church, but that income is a little precarious. The children pay some fees, which of course go to the upkeep of the school. The involvement of the sisters from England is clearly understood from Bishop Aylan's letter. The school was conducted in English and was subsidised by the government. Bishop Aylan continued, "It is a truly missionary work, an extensive field for many different apostolic works. We had at least 3 sisters who know English well and one capable of taking charge of the school, preferably of English nationality if possible. The present teachers are all qualified for the school, so it's necessary that the headmistress is also qualified so that she can occupy her post conveniently and honourably. See, respected Mother, if you can make this sacrifice, it is worth it." Father Giorgio Tomatis, in an accompanying letter, also highlights the denominational competition. There are Protestant schools not far from the above school, and the Archbishop assures us that if the sisters had competent staff, they could empty the Protestant schools where many Catholic girls also go. Though the East India Company had originally used Sanskrit and Arabic in their dealings with their employees, with the arrival of Lord Babington Macaulay in 1834, an immense change was signalled. Lord Thomas Babington Macaulay, born in 1800, arrived in India in 1834 to join the Governor's Council, determined to reform its education system by imposing a British model. He viewed Indian knowledge and culture as backward and sought to replace it with European ideals drawn from the Renaissance, the Scientific Revolution and the Enlightenment. His reform of 1835 imposed English as the medium of all communications in colonial India. As he wrote, "We must do our best to form a class who may be interpreters between us and the millions whom we govern, a class of persons, Indian in blood and colour, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals and in intellect." The British administration encouraged the development of what were sometimes called European schools or Anglo-Indian schools and subsidised them, but insisted on regular school inspections which followed the very Victorian outlook of payment by results. Despite the bishop's plea, the first 3 sisters who arrived in Madras were all Italian, one of whom had come to England to learn English, and the bishop quickly wrote to Father Rinaldi asking for his support. As a result, the Salesian sisters in London were asked to send sisters with recognised qualifications to take over the St Francis Xavier School on Broadway, Madras. From a note written on the above letter, it appears that Father Rinaldi forwarded the letter to Mother Vaschetti, recommending her to do the needful. Accordingly, on August the 19th, Mother Vaschetti replied to Monsignor Allen, assuring him of the arrival of one sister with the necessary qualifications from the English province. Subsequently, on November the 3rd, Sister Matilda Watts and Sister Annie Ward arrived in Madras. While Matilda Watts remained in Madras to take charge of the school, Sister Annie Ward was sent to Tanjore to help the community to learn English. Instead, in her place, Sister Annetta Gaidano was sent from Tanjore to join the community in Madras. The requirement that an English sister have the necessary qualifications posed a real challenge for the English Salesian sisters. Though in England there had been a Catholic teachers' training college in London since the 1850s, but until the First World War it was only open to men. The Kay Shuttleworth Pupils Teacher Scheme encouraged suitably selected students, both male and female, to complete a paid 5-year apprenticeship in state-funded elementary schools under the guidance of head teachers and inspected by the government inspectors. And having successfully completed this apprenticeship, successful students could receive a Queen's Scholarship to attend a training college, or could continue in paid employment but as uncertificated teachers. It was not until 1916 that the sisters' first school in Chertsey could benefit from the first qualified sisters who during the war were admitted at the Catholic Training College in Kensington. Sister Matilda Watts had first encountered the Salesian sisters when teaching in France as an Anglican, though she had no idea they were sisters, as under the anti-clerical legislation they were forbidden to wear habits or display any religious symbols. She was so influenced there that she decided to become a Catholic, despite the fierce opposition of her family, and returned to England and entered the Salesian Sisters community in Chertsey and was professed. She received her teaching diploma in 1921 and was given the role of head teacher. But in November 1925 she was sent to St Francis Xavier Convent, Madras, for 3 years and served as head teacher there, but returned to England in 1930. Sister Annie Ward also went to the Indian Mission in 1926, but went to work in Tanjore and then was transferred in 1939 to Assam in North India. There, during the Second World War, when the Italian sisters were all interned, she developed an itinerant ministry, travelling round from village to village with a woman companion, encouraging the Christians and teaching them catechism. Though she was not a qualified teacher, her dedication and imaginative response to the unique wartime situation stands out as one of the highlights of the Salesian missionary sisters in work in India. Sister Mary Ranner was another of the Indian pioneers. Born in London in 1909, she entered the Salesian Sisters in Chertsey in 1925. After various pupil teaching experiences, she attended La Sainte Union Catholic Training College in Southampton from 1933 to 1935, graduating as an infant and junior teacher. In 1936, she was called to work in the St Francis Xavier School in Madras. But her health suffered there, and when the sisters took over the school in Battersea from the Notre Dame sisters in 1939, Mother Tulia, the provincial in England, wrote to Mother Coliola, the provincial in India, requesting the return of Sister Mary Ranner. In fact, Sister Frances Pedrick actually took on the headship at Battersea, and Sister Mary became the head teacher at Farnborough instead, where she remained from 1939 until she retired in 1969. By 1936-37, St Francis Xavier Convent in Madras had Sister Margaret de Souza as the first Indian sister who was a qualified teacher as their headmistress. As well as the Indian mission, the sisters from the UK and Ireland also played a significant role in the Middle East. Sister Kathleen Cairns, who was born in Aldershot in 1892. After grammar school in Farnham, she joined the sisters at Chertsey in 1912, having been one of the pioneers in Limerick in Ireland from 1920 till 1925. In 1929, she set off for Alexandria in Egypt, where she taught in the sisters' school until 1939. She was on home leave when the war broke out, and she never returned to Egypt. Sister Annie Bradley was born in Newcastle in 1913 and entered the sisters at Chertsey in 1936. She qualified as a teacher of commercial subjects. She was asked to go to teach in Jerusalem and Palestine from 1938 to 1948, which was a very difficult years for what was a predominantly Italian community, some of whom were interned during the war. According to her own account, while she visited the sisters superiors in their internment camp, she also offered tea and cakes to the Allied soldiers who visited the convent in the absence of the superiors. After the war, the convent archives were destroyed when the Israelis took over the school and the convent. Sister Anne, as she was called, was then transferred to Alexandria in Egypt, where she taught until 1957. Advised by the then Patriarch, Sister Anne left Egypt during the Suez Crisis and Allied invasion and escaped via Damascus and Greece and returned to England in very poor health. As in all the Salesian missions, the original principle was that the Salesian missions should be international and not belong to one province or nationality. But the huge predominance of Italian missionaries, and especially among the Salesian sisters, meant that effectively the mission communities usually tended to be Italian in style and in language. The history of the Salesian mission in South Africa followed a somewhat different pattern, being founded from the house at Battersea, London in 1998, and depending on the Anglo-Irish province of which it remained a part for many years. Though the Cape Town house was part of the English province, it gradually more and more of the Salesians who worked there were of British or Irish origin, and it remained isolated and largely a work for what were called poor white children. And because of the prevailing racial segregation, little or no attempt was made to reach out to the greater part of the African and coloured population in a missionary way. It was only with the appointment of William Richard Ainsworth as provincial delegate, in fact acting provincial in South Africa in 1958, that any attempt was made to develop a wider missionary focus. Unusually for that time, Father Ainsworth foresaw the Salesian sisters as a fundamental part of the Salesian mission in South Africa. Introducing the Salesian sisters to South Africa. Father William Ainsworth can really be described as the co-founder of the work of the Salesian sisters in South Africa. In a letter to the then Mother Provincial of the English province in 1958, he claims that on his way out to take up his position as provincial delegate, he'd gone to the mother house of the sisters in Turin and asked to speak to their superiors, but could only speak to the superior of the house, who promised to hand on his plea for sisters to come to South Africa. He envisaged the English Salesian Sisters province founding a mission in South Africa in parallel with the Salesians from England. So life for the church is not easy. In South Africa, the existing government and many of the people are against the church. Immigration laws are very difficult. Many sisters have been refused entrance. But when did difficulty and dangers and hardships keep away any missionaries, especially those of Don Bosco and Mother Mazzarello? It would be a great pity if other religious orders of sisters who work here so valiantly were to think that the Daughters of Mary Help Christians, the second largest in the church, would not go where the soil was infertile, unless all was made ready for them and prepared and equipped. This is the impression one receives from previous correspondence on the subject with you or your predecessors that I have in my possession. Let us forget them and start again today. I deeply apologise for even mentioning such an idea, but I had to do it to forestall another letter which no doubt would quite unconsciously might seem to give the same impression. Forgive me. The important thing is for you and the good superiors to decide you will send missionary sisters to South Africa, 2 or 3 at a time, so we can begin. The Salesians are here. We have many friends among other sisters, and we would not let our own sisters starve or suffer great hardships. Nor would our friends allow this. Minor hardships, yes, but this would not keep you away. Under the previous provincial, Father Ainsworth found that his pleas fell on deaf ears. Or rather, he felt that the sisters' concerns for the stability and security of any new foundations and a hesitancy in taking risks were crippling their missionary spirit. In this very revealing letter, he vents his frustration, but also makes a heartwarming call for real risk-taking, a missionary spirit. Also in this letter he makes the suggestion that the sisters might be able to start a creche or nursery, which he believed would help working mothers and give their children a real education experience instead of merely being left in the care of servant girls who, because of their status, could not really attempt to educate the children. He was convinced that such a venture would also allow the sisters to become financially self-supporting. You wish to know how you would live. Here's one idea. Most of the women here go to work and leave their children in the care of native girls, who are for the most part pagans, who as servants do not guide or help or care for the children. There's a terrible need for a number of creches in the cities and towns. Think, dear Mother Provincial, for a very little. A place could be found where 3 sisters could start a creche and look after 100 children from 8 a.m. till 3:30 p.m. And parents would pay, I'm told, £4 a month. At £400 a month, you'd be far richer than we are in this school. Father Ainsworth is a man who was not frightened to speak his mind clearly, and does so in this letter. But what comes across is his zeal and conviction that the Salesian sisters should be in South Africa playing their part. With the arrival of Mother Andrina Arignano as provincial in England, Father Ainsworth found a very different tone of voice in his correspondence. Her pioneering work, first of all in Ireland and then in founding the Sisters' Novitiate and Student House in Friar Park in Henley-on-Thames, marked her out as someone who shared his pioneering zeal. What emerged from his initiative was a project for the Salesian Sisters to take over a school for Swazi children that the Servite Sisters had founded at Mbabane in Swaziland. The Italian Servites had founded the mission, and Bishop Barneschi had invited the Salesians to start a boys' school at Bremersdorp, which was begun in 1953. Father Ainsworth instinctively saw that this was really missionary work of the first order. Thank you for the copy of the Convenzione, which is clear and modest enough. Really, there's no possible reply to be made by those who oppose your coming. They invited you. They more or less agreed after a long and complete discussions in which all your efforts were directed to make them speak their minds clearly, so often that it was contrary. But one sees now that neither the Bishop nor the Vicar General felt able to commit themselves without reference to their council. We shall now see what reply you received to your offer on behalf of Mother General. May I be permitted to say what a contrast there is in Mother Generals. How anxious to help, how wise and conciliatory has your godmother shown herself. Comparisons being odious, I will not make them, but if there's still some objection, then I feel the matter will have to end. No one will be more disappointed than Bishop Barneschi, who has opposed his own people very strongly, but he cannot fight everybody all the time, poor man. The attitude taken up by certain good fathers in defence of their sisters is chivalrous, but quite unrealistic. The Servite sisters in Mbabane actually have one sister teaching, and she teaches sewing only. I was told, I know what Mr. Pitcher thinks, the education officer. Ainsworth believed that this would be an ideal setting among the native Swazis to begin the Salesian sisters' work. The Bishop and his Vicar General, Monsignor Botta, were both very keen. He persuaded Mother Andrina to come herself with Sister Maria Lord, an English sister, to make a preparatory visit and to confirm the details of the convention or agreement between the sisters and the diocese. However, after this exploratory visit, the sisters asked that the mixed classes of boys and girls be separated, as the sisters by tradition only worked for girls. This clause caused a major reaction from the Episcopal Council, made up of Italian Servites, who saw this as a move undermining the position of the Servite sisters, though according to Ainsworth there was only one Servite sister involved in the school. Even when the Salesian Sisters Superior General had agreed that for an initial period the classes could remain mixed, the Council had definitely made up their minds to oppose the foundation. Ainsworth's letter to Mother Andrina shows that he's clearly aware of the opposition that Bishop Barneschi faces among the Servites themselves, and knows only too well that the offer to accept mixed classes will probably not be enough to settle the opposition. But he's convinced that at least this will be a clear answer. When on the following day he writes to confirm the bad news, he sees the decision as final and sad, but is willing to discern the hand of God in it. You will have received my recent letter, but now as I have to communicate to you what must be the final decision in Swaziland, it's a sad decision, sad for many reasons, but one which we must accept. The Bishop asked me to inform you of the decision of his council with as much charity and understanding as possible. The long and sorrowful letter he sent me, he asked me to keep as confidential. Perhaps therefore the quickest and simplest thing for me to say is that the invitation extended to you by the Servites of Swaziland has now been withdrawn. This is the wish both of the Servites and their sisters. The Bishop has expressed his extreme sorrow at the decision, a decision which he is compelled to follow. He asked me to thank you for your kindness in offering to send your sisters, and for all that was done to make this possible. He is, as you know, a bishop of a very poor territory. He's given me a cheque for £200 as a goodwill offering to you in part payment of your expenses. I can well understand he can do no more. Not to be put off, he suggests reconsidering the offer of the Archbishop of Cape Town, Archbishop McCann, of a school for coloured children at Parle in the Cape. In recognition of the poverty of the mission, the Sisters Superiors asked Father Ainsworth to return the money to Bishop. The sisters eventually opened their first house in 1962 in Belleville in the Cape Town Diocese as a parish primary school for European children, as a way of being able to prepare to work at Parle in a coloured school. Father Ainsworth's letter reassures Mother Andrina that the parish will welcome them, and then goes on to recommend a flexibility of approach that's necessary in a missionary country, even among the Italians, the Dutch and others. I do not presume to exhort you, dear Mother Provincial, to allow your sisters as much elasticity as possible in their work. As you found at Mbane, this is a different country, a different world, and we must all adapt ourselves to it without clinging too rigidly to European standards or practice. In Swaziland, your Mother General eventually swept away, for the present, all that had been holding up progress. As you know only too well, the opposition too strong and too unreasonable. At Belleville they will receive you with the greatest affection. They are praying for the sisters to come among them to help. The Italians, the Hollanders, the Portuguese, I'm sure your own generous heart will go out to these people. Treat them as you would treat them in a missionary country, and allow them as much latitude as your rule will allow under these circumstances to carry out a much needed apostolate. Mother Andrina came back to Father Ainsworth, having agreed to send 3 more sisters the following year for Pearl, to explore further the possibilities of a creche which he'd floated in earlier correspondence. He replies with an advantageous offer to allow the sisters to have the original Ozanam house for £6,000 to be paid back without interest over a period of 20 years. Eventually this became a creche and a nursery school right next to the Salesian Provincial House in Boysons in Johannesburg. Father Ainsworth also advised the sisters about their setting themselves up as a limited company, and offers some very cogent advice about the publications that Mother Andrina had asked him to look at with his editor's eye before they were printed. This he did with characteristic honesty and professionalism. I have read 2 of the 3 manuscripts you asked me to look over, and would like to make the following comments. If this preface is meant to stimulate girls to read the life, I very much doubt if it will. Most normal girls, even the better ones, will be put off by such stern reflections that it will be a suitable gift for the modern girl. That might be all right for their parents or for reverend mothers, but Perhaps his most revealing letter to Mother Andrina is the one in which he wrote with regard to the sisters opening their house in Belleville. However, I feel that in some way they are in my care, that Don Bosco would want me to look upon them as such, however remotely, and that there as a father must plead for his children, his daughters as well as his clamorous sons, the gentleness of the daughter can often obtain more than the loud demand of the son. Father Ainsworth's determination to initiate and support the Salesian Sisters Foundation in South Africa was far from being a commonplace among the English Salesians. For many Salesians, the sisters were appreciated mostly for their wonderful domestic work that they did in caring for the Salesians and the boarders in the houses at Battersea, Chertsey, Cowley and Farnborough. Father Ainsworth instead realised the critical role the sisters could play in the missionary and educational work of the Salesians in South Africa. Perhaps it stemmed from his warm relationship with his own sisters, on whom he depended totally as a young child in the convent orphanage when his mother died in New York before the First World War. During his second period as delegate, Sister Kathleen O'Callaghan became the provincial in England and South Africa. She had been one of the pioneers in Cape Town and obviously had a deep affection for Father Ainsworth. She wrote regularly to him and often asked his priestly ministry as a retreat teacher and advisor. His letters confirmed her strength of purpose, and he encouraged her to embrace the flexibility of the Vatican Council that was recommended without losing touch with the origins of the Salesian charism. I admire your looking forward to the battles of the chapter. Uninitiated indeed. Yes, I'm glad you have the taste for conflict and discussion. I really feel this chapter will be desperately important for you as our 20th was for us. There is enormous potential in the dear FMA, but I pray there will be many who will share your healthy reaction. I pray that the Holy Spirit will really inspire the holy women to see that updating, ongoing and all the rest of the modern jargon doesn't mean you have to throw out your ideals and traditions overboard. I'm an old fogey enough to view with concern ideas that are too liberal for my taste. But I see clearly that we cannot shut ourselves behind walls of tradition, which could really be walls of prejudice, cutting off our vision of changing the world in need. This sounds like track 90, so I better shut up. You'll hear loads of this ad nauseam. I was aware, at least in part, of what you say, and whenever I am here, I'm always most anxious to get the sisters away to give them an evening without cooking and washing up. Conclusion. The UK and Irish Salesian sisters have made a significant contribution to the Salesian mission ad gentes since the very beginning of their presence in the UK, often at the cost of their own educational and pastoral development. In the earliest period, English sisters played an important part in the work of enabling children of Italian immigrants in the USA to learn and speak English. In the period between the wars, the sisters, though few, made an important contribution to the foundation of the sisters' educational work in Madras, with the need for suitably qualified personnel to lead their schools, and also in the Middle East. Finally, in the post-war period, with the encouragement of Father William Ainsworth, the Salesian Sisters GBR province began their own educational work in South Africa. That was part of the Anglo-Irish province and established their own missionary presence in what was a very challenging environment. All this work was undertaken, often at the cost of very significant members of the province, many of whom were qualified teachers and could have provided important leadership for the sisters' educational mission in the UK and Ireland. Thank you very much.